Hello, how are you? And I hope you're having a wonderful day. Today we're going to talk about probably the most greeniest, stompiest deck that I've ever talked about on this channel, and that is Baru Worm Speaker. Now, before we go through with the deck tech, please like, comment, and subscribe to the channel, and you can get the algorithm so we can get our numbers jumping up. And with that, let's talk about the deck tech. Baru is a 3/3 human druid for 2 and 2 green, who states, worms you control get +2/+2 and have trample. Additionally, you can pay 7 and a green and tap them to create a 4/4 green worm token. This ability does cost X less to activate, where X is the greatest power among worms you control. So worms are already a massive creature in themselves, but giving them an additional +2/+2 and trample if they already didn't have it makes for a massively scary board state. On top of that, he can create 4/4 worm tokens, and we all know green is the best color for multiplying the number of tokens you can generate. So he can make an army of essentially 6/6 tokens with very little ease. For an obscure-ish creature type, there's quite a bit of actual worms that we could put in this deck that are surprisingly good. We have the Agathian worm, which is a 6/6 worm for 4 mana. It has trample, and when the Agathian worm enters the battlefield, any player may sacrifice a land to put Agathian worm on top of its owner's library. We have the Battering Worm, which is a 4/3 worm for 7 mana. Though this does seem expensive, it does come with the ability Bloodthirst 1, and creatures with power less than it can't block it, which will almost always make for easy damage on the player. The Bellowing Tangle Worm is a 4/4 for 5 worm with Intimidate that gives all our other green creatures Intimidate, just another way to make it more difficult to block our creatures and get them through. Bookworm is a thick one at 7/7 for 8 mana. It comes with trample. When it enters the battlefield, you'll gain 3 life and you'll get to draw a card. If you pay 2 and a green while it's in the graveyard, you can put a third from the top of your library to give it some recursion. Chameleon Colossus is a worm, and don't you think otherwise? It is a 4/4 for 4 with protection from black and has 2 and 2 green that it can double its power, and not a tap effect, so you can keep on doing this. Death Coil Worm is a 7/6 for 8 that states you may assign its combat damage as if it was never blocked, so going right to the face. Again, another way that's making it more difficult to be blocked. Defiler of Vigor is absolutely amazing. It is a 6/6 for 5 with trample. As an additional cost to cast green permanent spells, you may pay 2 life. These spells cost 1 green less to cast if paid this way. This effect can reduce only the amount of green mana you pay. Essentially, you have Phyrexian green in all of your green permanents. Additionally, whenever you do cast a green permanent spell, put a 1/1 counter on each creature you control. That don't make any damn sense. Emergent Worm is a 4/4 for 7. It has backup 3. And states that when this creature attacks, look at the top X cards of your library where X is its power. You may put a permanent with mana value X or less from among them on the battlefield. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Backup 3 is amazing because you can either give him the 1/1 counters or give the 1/1 counters to another creature and they'll gain this ability. So you could put this on Bookworm and make it a 10/9. If your commander is out, it becomes a 12/8. So the math, you get what I mean. His power is gonna be 12, and you can grab pretty much anything and slap it right on the battlefield. Engulfing Worm is a 7/7 for 7. It states whenever it becomes blocked or does block, destroy that creature and you gain life equal to its toughness. This is a triggered effect, so before even the damage is done, considering double strike or first strike, it will kill them outright before even damages. So don't be afraid of any first strikers or death touches because they'll die first. Growth Thama All Devouring is one of my favorite cards in this deck, and I don't think I'll ever take it out. It is a 10/8 worm for 5 mana. Other creatures have, whenever this creature attacks, you may have it fight Grothama All Devouring. When Grothama leaves the battlefield, each player draws cards equal to the amount of damage dealt to Grothama this turn by sources they controlled. So you basically want to make your worms fight this worm and then draw a bajillion cards all at once. The all-empowering Impervious Great Worm. It is a 16/16 for 10 mana. It has Convoke, so you can tap other creatures to make it cheaper, and it has Indestructible. That's it. But with our commander, that's an easy 18/18 Indestructible Trampling Worm. Pan and Glacial Worm is absolutely killer in this deck. It is a 9/5 for 7 with trample. While searching your library, you may play Pan Glacial Worm from your library. So you know, Kodama's Reach, Cultivate, any search effect that you would use, you can then pay the mana and then get him on the field. If he's not on the field or in your graveyard, and then you have a late game Kodama's Reach or something, just play him as well. And now you've got a late game body. Palooka Worm, which is a 7/7 for 7. It has trample. When it enters the battlefield, it'll gain you 7 life, and when it dies, you get to draw a card. The Penumbra Worm. It is a 6/6 for 7 mana with trample that when it dies, it creates a 6/6 black worm token. So, you know, if we have any token doublers, this works out really well for us. Plated Slagworm is an 8/8 for 7 with hexproof. That is all. I just like the fact that it can't be targeted, and I'm here for that. World Spine Worm is a 15/15 trample that states when it dies, put 3 5/5 worm creature tokens onto the battlefield, and when it's put into the graveyard from anywhere, shuffle it into its owner's library. So that way, unless they exile it, we can possibly get this over and over and over again. The good old Worm Coil Engine. This bad boy is a 6/6 for 6 artifact creature worm. It has Death Touch and Lifelink, and when it dies, create a 3/3 worm artifact creature with Death Touch and another 3/3 colorless worm artifact creature with Lifelink. Now, to pay for these big creatures, we're going to need a lot of Mono Rocks and a Mono Dorks. Now, obviously, the Mono Dorks are going to be some of the obvious ones. Lanamore Elves, Fendhorn Elves, Birds of Paradise, and Mystic Elves. But there are 2 others that I'd like to go through that are absolute all-stars in this deck. Karametra's Acolyte is a 1/4 human druid for 3 and a green. It states, tap, add an amount of green mana to your mana pool equal to your devotion to green. Since our worms are going to be multiple greens, and some of our enchantments are even multiple greens, this is going to be a dump load of mana we can get at one time. And we have Savella, Heart of the Wilds. She is a 2/3 elf scout for 1 and 2 greens. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield, its controller may draw a card if its power is greater than each other creature's power. For worms, that's pretty easy to accomplish. Additionally, she has tap, pay a green and tap her to add X mana in any combination of colors where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. Which, we're going to have beefy people, that's going to be beefy mana. Now, outside of all of the Mono Rocks, the Mono Dorks, and even the ramp spells that we're adding into the deck, we're going to add a few spells in to also reduce the cost of the worms, considering that they're really, really expensive. We've got a green Medallion, which is going to reduce all of our green spells cost by 1. We have Gorecaw, Terror of Kalsima, Sisma? I think it's Sisma. Well, anyway, creature spells with power 4 or greater, which is all of our worms, have cost 2 less to cast. Additionally, whenever it attacks, each creature you control with power 4 or greater gets an additional +1/+1 and trample until the end of the turn. We have Herald's Horn. It states whenever it enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. We're going to choose Worm, and all of the worms are going to cost 1 less. At the beginning of your upkeep, we can look at the top card of our library, and if it's a chosen type, in this case Worm, we get to reveal it and put the extra card in our hand. That will happen before our draw step, so it's essentially pseudo-draw. Rona's Monument is going to allow our green creature spells to cost 1 less, and whenever we cast a creature spell, we can give one of our creatures +2/+2 and trample until the end of turn. And lastly, we have Urza's Incubator. It states we choose a creature type when it enters the battlefield, and all creatures of the chosen type cost 2 less to cast. With green being the second, if not the best color for drawing a ton of cards, we got a lot of cards to put in our deck here that can get us a bunch of value. Our first card is the Bonder's Enclave, which is going to be taken up in our land slot. It can tap for a colorless mana, but also if we pay 3 and tap it, you can draw a card. We can only do this if we have a creature with power 4 or greater, but considering commanders dropping a minimum of 4 power, we can do this very easily. We've got Elemental Bond. It's an enchantment that costs 2 and a green, and it states whenever a creature with power 3 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card, which, as again, all of our creatures are a minimum 4. Garruk's Uprising is another green staple. It's 2 and a green enchantment that states whenever Garruk Uprising enters the battlefield, if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, draw a card. Creatures you control also have trample, and whenever another creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card. So yeah, just all the value. Next up is Greater Good. This is my absolute favorite enchantment in the entire game. It is 2 and 2 greens. It states sacrifice a creature, draw cards equal to the sacrificed creature's power, then discard 3 cards. If someone's going to remove your creatures at instant speed, you can draw a ton of cards considering how massive our worms are going to be. And in that same category, we got Monumentous Fall, which is an instant speed for 2 and 2 green. It states as an additional cost to cast a spell, sacrifice a creature. You draw cards equal to its power and then gain life equal to its toughness. If you're about to get damaged out the game, sack a worm, gain some life. If you need some card draw, sack a worm and draw some cards. It's so good. Return of the Wild Speaker is another staple as well. We've all seen this before. It has 2 modes. It's an instant for a 4 and a green. The first mode says draw cards equal to the greatest power among non-human creatures you control. Nice. And the second one is non-human creatures you control get +3/+3. A little overrun without the trample. Rishkar's Expertise is 4 and 2 green as sorcery. It allows you to draw cards equal to the greatest power among creatures you control. Additionally, you may also cast a spell with mana value 5 or less from your hand without paying its mana cost. And lastly in this category, we got a Vanquisher's Banner. It's an artifact for 5 mana. It states as a Vanquisher's Banner enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Creatures you control of the chosen type get an additional +1/+1, and whenever you cast a spell of that type, you get to draw a card. Lastly, let's go over the honorable mentions. We have Descendant's Path, which states at the beginning of your upkeep, reveal the top card of your library. If it's a creature card that shares a creature type with a creature you control, you may cast it without paying its mana cost. If you don't cast it, put it on the bottom of your library. This card is going to allow us to look at the top card, and if it's a worm and we already have a worm on the battlefield, then we get that worm onto the battlefield for free before our draw step. The only downside is if it's a card that we absolutely need, then we're going to end up pitching it to the bottom of our library. Doubling Season and Parallel Lives both serve as the same purpose, which allows us to double up the number of tokens that we can get, and as you can see, this deck generates a lot of worm tokens. Garruk the Primal Hunter is a planeswalker that comes in with 3 Lords encounters. It states our +1 gives us a 3/3 green beast. We don't really care for that. -3 allows us to draw cards equal to the greatest power among creatures we control. That is amazing. And on -6 allows us to create a 6/6 green worm creature token for each land we control. That's our payload right there. Magus of the Order is a 3/3 human wizard for 2 and 2 green. It states you can pay a green and tap it and sacrifice it and another green creature and search your library for a green creature card and put it onto the battlefield. Then shuffle your library. We can easily sacrifice one of our tokens that our commanders created and then bring out the impervious worm or something, which is just free. Monster Manual functions almost the same way as Magus of the Order. It's an artifact that is 3 and a green, and that we can then pay 1 and a green to tap it, and we may put a creature card from our hand onto the battlefield. It also has an adventure side called Zoological Study for 2 and a green, which states mill 5 cards, then return a creature card milled this way to your hand, which is not one side we're ultimately looking for. It's the artifact side we really want. And Natural Order is a sorcery for 2 and a green that states as an additional cost to cast Natural Order, sacrifice a green creature. Search your library for a green creature and put it into the battlefield, then shuffle your library. It's a green tutor that we can sacrifice one of our tokens for to get our biggest, most terrifying creature on the battlefield for free. So yeah, doing what green does best. And lastly, we have the Great Henge. It's a legendary artifact for 7 and 2 green. It states this card costs X less, where X is the greatest power amongst creatures you control. You can tap it and it gives you 2 green and you gain 2 life. Whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield, put a 1/1 counter on it and draw a card. The Great Henge is going to get us a ton of value from just our regular worms. It's going to give us some life gain because we might get beat up a lot, and it's a ton of mana. Also, this thing is going to be practically free. Consider all of our worms are going to be so jacked that this thing is going to be 2 mana pretty much all game long. And there you have it. That's our deck tech for Baru Worm Speaker. I said it in the beginning, and that's exactly what this is. It is a green stompy deck. You just go big, turn creatures sideways, and break through the defense line straight to the life. And honestly, it's a very simple way to play the game. And honestly, as simple as he is, I think he's really, really strong, but also has a really good way of giving this deck to a beginner player. Because if anyone wants to learn Magic, this is probably the commander to go through. Now, the first and prominent weakness to this deck that I can come with is the mana curve. The mana curve is really, really high in this deck, and that's to be expected considering what it is. But, you know, being mono green, that shouldn't be too much of an issue if we're able to ramp out and get a bunch of dorks really, really fast. The other weaknesses, we gotta worry about blue players, and I think that goes for pretty much every deck. Everyone has to watch out for blue players, but you can add in some Summer's Veil and things like that to help keep you from being countered, and maybe some other cards like the Allosaurus Shepherd to keep your creatures from being countered at all. So that's pretty much the weaknesses that I could think of, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Sorry it's been a really long time, but here I am, and I'm gonna do the best I can this year. So if you like this video or have any ideas what you want to do, comment down below what you thought, and like the video if you liked it. If you didn't, hit the dislike. I won't be upset, and I'll catch you around for the next video. I promise you it won't be that far away. Thank you for coming around, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.